Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another stream with Rock Island Sound and the Westchester Children's Museum. Hope you're all having a lovely Tuesday morning. My name is Rachel, for those of you who haven't seen me before. I am a voice, guitar, and piano instructor here at Rock Island Sound, and I've been doing some weekly streams with the Westchester Children's Museum talking about American popular music history. And it's been really, really fun. Last week we finished up with the 2010s and we discussed some of the popular artists and the most influential artists of our past decade. If you didn't get a chance to watch that, you're interested, I think it's still up on the page. But today we are going to delve into a different section of history, and that is the history of musical theater, American musical theater, that is. So we're going to talk about the first half of this history, I guess, today, and then we're going to finish it up on Friday with the more modern musicals and more modern, composers and artists. And then hopefully you'll have a better idea of how the musical came to be in America. So the most important thing to note is that the American musical that we know now wasn't originally called a musical, and there wasn't an original title for how these things worked. There were no acts. They were just known as sections, and really the musical came from a combination of burlesque performances and vaudeville performances. Does anybody know what those are? You heard those words before? Well, if not, don't fear, because I'm going to tell you. Burlesque sort of began in the early 1900s. It comes from the Italian word burlesco, meaning a joke or a mockery. But in the sense that we're discussing, burlesque refers to a variety show, a cabaret, if you will. And this actually dated back all the way to the 1860s, up until the 1940s, which was when real musicals sort of started taking precedent. Burlesque shows would occur in cabarets and clubs, and they would focus on body comedy, and they would always be split up into three sections. Like the first section, instead of being called an act, would just be the comedy section, and then we'd have the song section, and then we'd have the big number section, which would usually include a lot of dancing and different things that you do when you're in a burlesque show. And then the other sort of type of performance that was popular in the early 1900s was vaudeville. And vaudeville, I mean, it's used to describe this era of performances, but it also was just a real place and a real like theater as well. Usually, it would be described as just a type of popular entertainment in the early 20th century, featuring a mixture of different specialty acts like burlesque, comedy, song and dance, all of the good stuff that you would expect in a musical nowadays, anyways. But these two things sort of faded away as the real musical started to come to light. And although there were different prototypes, if you will, and different shows that sort of got the ball rolling, the first one that really got the ball rolling was Oklahoma. Have any of you guys seen Oklahoma? You know what it's about? Well, we're not going to go into the full-blown content of the show and the plot line, but what I will say is that it was the first musical ever written by Rodgers and Hammerstein. You guys know Rodgers and Hammerstein? Well, they are some of the most famous lyricists and composers, incredibly innovative and successful in musical theater, often known as the greatest songwriting team of the 20th century. Yes. Um, they were also essentially known as, being a part of the golden age of musical theater. Some other examples besides Oklahoma of soundtracks that they wrote: South Pacific, Carousel, many, many more. So they wrote Oklahoma, the music for Oklahoma, and This won an Academy Award. This opened on Broadway in 1943, and most people would say that this totally revolutionized the modern musical because, like I said, there were some shows that had existed beforehand, but none of them had really utilized the themes and the motifs. And Oklahoma decided to make a larger, overarching theme, um, almost a social commentary. And that's really what makes a good show, is something that has an overarching theme, maybe a lesson to learn, um, motifs to pick up on and take note of. And that's what they mean by revolutionize the modern musical, is that before that it was just it was what you see is what you get: comedy, song, dance. There was no overarching storyline that ended up bringing you to think and to question uh, what the theme was and what the motives of the characters were. So Oklahoma really changed that for musical writers going forward. And another important figure to note, because we're just going to really talk about some important figures today, would be Florence Ziegfeld. You ever heard of Florence Ziegfeld? Ziegfeld? So Florence was an American Broadway impresario, and he was noted for his series of theatrical revues called the Ziegfeld Follies. So if you've ever seen a high school or a middle school do what they like to call a musical revue, where they go through and sing like one song from a different show, they got that from Florence Ziegfeld. That was essentially what he was doing, is he would have these reviews and he would talk about some of the shows that he'd seen, and then he'd perform some of their numbers. And we do that all the time now. Schools do that all the time, and that's exactly where it came from. But beyond that, he also produced the musical Showboat, which was another up and coming show that started to change the industry, similar to Oklahoma. And he was also known as the glorifier of the American girl. And the way I interpret that is that he sort of created these shows that had lead female roles. Not really sure how else to interpret that, but take it as you will. Another important composer that is definitely worth noting would be Irving Berlin. Have any of you guys heard of Irving Berlin? Well, I will tell you. He was an American composer and lyricist, and he's widely considered one of the greatest songwriters of all time, most notable for writing Alexander's Ragtime Band. And he actually wrote an estimated 1,500 songs in his lifetime, including the scores for 20 original Broadway shows. Whew, that's a lot of writing. That's a lot of material to have. It's very impressive. Um, Another important figure in the early theater scene, somebody we actually talked about in our first week when we were talking about the 1910s and 20s in popular music. This guy was all over the place, and this is Burt Williams. He was a Bahamian American entertainer. He was the preeminent entertainer in the vaudeville era and a popular comedian. He would usually make fun of himself. He was the best-selling Black recording artist before 1920, which is an incredible feat. Um, and he was the first Black American to take a lead role on the Broadway stage. So he really, really set the bar. And if it were not for him, who knows when that would have occurred. He was definitely an inspiration to many, despite some of his questionable content that he would make comedy about. But while it was questionable, it was just to save face, to be the image that people wanted him to be. And that's all I'll say on that. You could always do some more research on him if you feel so inclined. Some other important songwriting teams. There's a lot of songwriting teams, like Rodgers and Hammerstein. One of them did the lyrics, and the other one did the arranging, the instrumentation, the melody. And so a lot of songwriting teams write musicals because they sort of put their heads together and take the best of what they know, and then it can really create something magical. So another popular songwriting team was Comden and Green. It was Betty Comden, Adolph Green, and they wrote scripts and lyrics for many Broadway shows and also Hollywood film musicals later in life. They met in 1938. They were making the rounds with their theatrical agents, um, and they joined the iconic Leonard Bernstein and Jerome Robbins in creating the musical On the Town. And they also wrote the film script of Singing in the Rain. So that takes me to Leonard Bernstein, who is, like I said, iconic, definitely an incredibly influential person in the theater industry, um, one of the most influential composers and conductors and pianists. He really just had all three of those in the bag, and he was one of the first conductors to be born and educated in the US to receive worldwide acclaim. A lot of conductors were from Europe, and Leonard Bernstein really changed that by being a regular old American and receiving worldwide acclaim. Um, his fame sort of came from his long tenure as the music director of the New York Philharmonic, and for his music, the soundtracks and the arrangements that he composed for West Side Story, Candide, On the Town, and a bunch of other compositions. Um, he wrote in many styles, and he liked to encompass symphonic and orchestral music, ballet, and theatrical music all in one. However, none of his works have matched the tremendous and popular critical success of West Side Story. West Side Story was probably the first musical I saw as a child when I was, able to find it and watch it on TV. And still remember being completely blown away by all of it. The dancing, the music arrangements, the singing, every part of it, the acting, it was just absolutely fantastic. And West Side Story is essentially a Romeo and Juliet tale taking place, really just focusing on race relations and uh, gang life in New York City. A lot of it is a little bit, um, yeah, a little bit theatrical for what it would have been, but that makes sense. It was a show. Um, a lot of musical theater is overacting and overdoing certain parts of history to make them more entertaining and to manipulate them to sort of be worthy of a 2 hour long production. And that is exactly sort of what they did with West Side Story, um, utilizing all of the best talent that they had for each role to put on fantastic numbers filled with dancing and just chemistry between all of the actors and actresses. It was a really, really powerful show. I highly recommend. Um, but that takes me to Jerome Robbins, and Jerome Robbins was a widely influential and widely known American choreographer as well. He was a director and dancer and a producer, and he worked in balls on Broadway. He was born uh, in the Lower East Side of Manhattan, and he thought he was just going to be a regular guy in his family, but he ended up seeing that he had a gift for dance and for choreo, and that led him to work on a bunch of stage productions like On the Town, The King and I, The Pajama Game, obviously West Side Story, Fiddler on the Roof as well. And all of this work led him to receive 2 Academy Awards for West Side Story. And he even had a documentary made about him in 2009, and this premiered on PBS. It was called Something to Dance About. So that's definitely worth checking out as well. And that takes me to our last sort of influential figure, and that's also on the dance track, and that would be Gwen Verdon. So Gwen Verdon was the wife and, well, she was an actress and a dancer on her own, and then additionally she was the wife of well-known choreographer Bob Fosse. But Gwen won 4 Tonys for her musical comedy performances, and people knew her. They were able to identify her. She had bright red hair, and she had a very classically identifiable voice. And she was a critically acclaimed performer on Broadway in the late 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. like I said, she's definitely strongly associated with her second husband, director and choreographer Bob Fosse, but she stands alone and did a lot of really amazing stuff on her own, so there's no need to completely tie her to him. Um, she was born in outside of Los Angeles in California, and by the time she was 6 years old, she was already dancing on stage, which is pretty hilarious to me. But that's going to wrap us up with all of our important figures. And I think for the last couple of minutes, we'll just discuss sort of what we're going to talk about next time and what makes a powerful show. This also brings me to remind us that in 1935 to 1939, there was a lot of pushback for getting some more funding for live theater. And that at the end of 1939, the Federal Theater Project came to be throughout with this New Deal program to fund theater and other live performances during the Great Depression. And that definitely helped Oklahoma come to be. It helped all of our, starting out Broadway shows come to be. It was really a wonderful choice that was made by the government to help live performers and give them the funds that they need to really put on a powerful show. So when we say powerful show, we mean a show that makes people think. We mean a show that has, like I said, themes, motifs, characters that we can relate to, characters that we can passionately like, passionately dislike. We don't want everything to be filler. We want everybody to have a purpose. And when it's also subjective, I mean, there are plenty of shows that I could like that you might not like, or vice versa. But for the most part, when you want to identify a powerful show, you just need to think about whether or not it makes you think about the content. You leave the show considering different options, wondering if it ended the way you wanted it, wondering which characters were actually in the right. Similar to any movie or TV show that you might like, you just want it to have um, a little bit of a long lasting effect on you. You don't want to, it also depends what you're looking for. There are plenty of musicals that are just comedies, and that's all they do. They make you laugh, and that's it, and there's no thinking afterwards. But a lot of the time in shows like that, there are subtle satirical ways to incorporate real life issues. And if you're able to pick up on that as well, then you can usually appreciate some of those productions even more than the average person. Um, so next time we're going to talk a lot about the most recent 70s and on shows, and I'm really excited for that, and different figureheads, even modern ones, different people that I'm sure some of you guys will have heard of when we talk about Hamilton and all of that and on Friday. So make sure to tune in to Noah tomorrow, talking about the drums and trumpet. And I will see you all on Friday for our last stream episode of American history centering around music and musical theater. I hope you all enjoyed. Have a wonderful Tuesday, and I will see you on Friday. Bye, everyone.